The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process.
What's really great about being here in Boston and being an electronic music artist, is the community is vibrant.
Yeah.
And so there are some real movers and shakers in the community, people who organize events and invite other artists to play. And one of those people is Des DiCarlo of Violet Knox. And she puts together, great lineups. And last year, she invited myself and Glenn separately, and we were on the bill. And I didn't know Glenn at the time, and he didn't know me, but we performed. And after his set and after my set, I just, found him and took him aside and said, "Glenn, I think we're doing the same thing, man." He's like, "Yeah, we're like on the same wavelength." What we were doing, which was performing with our respective instruments, combining that with a looper and using that to evolve, very thick landscapes and soundscapes. And we both agreed we should try to. It's kind of like the peanut butter and chocolate, let's bring these things together. They're going to be great, and let's see what happens. And that's what we did.
Do you think it was an aesthetic thing that drew you together, or do you think it was kind of a technical aspect? Like you mentioned, you're both kind of playing an instrument plus a sort of looper and effects. Was it the process that drew you together, or just like you said, the community and the sort of aesthetic?
I think it was the process and the aesthetic. I liked the sound of what he was doing,
Hmm.
and I thought it felt like it would work together well.
Right.
Exactly. It was two halves of a coin, and if we could bring them together, the combination would be greater than the individual parts. That was the vision.
So, that kind of that sort of drew you together. So you did some shows, and I've been to a few of them. Fantastic shows. Sometimes more on the kind of ambient and drone side. Sometimes a little bit more kind of interactive. I think more recently at the show at the Foundry this spring. So you're doing all these wonderful shows. How does that become an album?
Well, one of the first things we did, even before we started performing, because I think we actually didn't perform together until maybe starting back in December.
Hmm.
If you go all the way back after it was the spring of 2024 when we met.
Hmm.
Glenn came over. I have a home studio. Glenn came over and we just got things set up. And interestingly enough, again, the aesthetic, we both improvise our music.
Hmm.
And that, again, drew us to one another. It's like, okay, we both are improvising on our instruments using loopers, but the end result, we both love what that evolving, rolling sound. We just enjoyed what that was immensely. So I said, why don't we try to do it together? And so we actually got together 4 times in 2024. And each time we just simply improvised for 2 hours and recorded everything.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
out of those, 8+ hours of material,
Yeah.
we carved out at first 12 and then whittled it down to the what we felt were the best 9 moments. They really are just moments of the improv where you choose where to begin, you choose where to end, and everything in between. It's like, that was a beautiful arc right there. That was a perfect story arc. Let's capture that. And then it really just came down to a little bit of mixing. Not much though, because it was, Glenn had a few tracks recorded. I had a few tracks recorded, but it was all live. And then just mixing that and mastering it, and album done.
Well, that's really interesting. So it wasn't sort of practice, jam, rehearse, perform, and then turn those things into smaller songs. It was, hey, let's come over, record for about 2 hours, and then, hey, from 1:45 to 2:10, we had a really good section there. And so you just literally took that sort of improv session, and that's what we hear on the album.
Correct.
Yeah, Bob did the grunt work there of listening to all the tapes
8
and figuring
hours.
out,
Yeah.
for all I know, there's some really stuff I would have really loved that we didn't put on the album. Because he's the one that went through it and said, let's take
That's why
this.
it's so synth heavy. There's like no clarinet on the album, right?
Good,
We're saving it for follow-on albums. All right. So we have hours of material.
Well, that's interesting, Glenn. So you're saying when you were listening to some of these things, then so Bob kind of said, "Hey, here are some good nuggets," and kind of sent those to you. What was your sort of? Did you have any criteria for what you were hearing? You were like, "Oh, I don't like this one," or because you said you had a bunch and then you narrowed it down to maybe like 9.
I would give my opinion about some of them that,
Sure.
or really together we decided this one doesn't sound as good as this or whatever. So it was.
Yeah.
I wasn't really thinking in terms of an album at that point. So much as Bob just went through and pulled stuff out and said, "How about this? How about this?" And it's like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds.
Yeah.
So it sort of fell together.
Well, that's great. So the improv is really the album. So that makes me wonder then, were there rules for the improv? And I don't mean like, stand on one leg or like,
It's an
but were
incredibly
there,
long list of rules. Yeah.
it's exhaustive, right? Yeah.
Well, first off, we have we have to talk about the equipment, because the equipment
Sure.
sort of becomes all of the equipment is the instrument.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll let Glenn talk about how he configures his environment. But for the album, what I had is I had a Rhodes piano
Yeah.
that was going through its own looper.
Great.
And then I had the Expressive E Osmos, and that was going through its own looper,
Great.
neither of which were synchronized. All right. And so then Glenn,
Yeah, I keep things pretty simple. I was just playing a clarinet, and I have going through a guitar effects, multi-effects box.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't really use a lot of effects actually on this album, and then into a Boss DD20 delay pedal,
Sure.
and so that's all I used. And the challenge of the situation to me is when you're playing through loopers, it's very easy to get too much sound happening. So we
Right.
both had to be very disciplined about not overwhelming the soundscape with
Exactly.
too much loopage.
right?
So that's kind of a rule, is to kind of keep the sound contained, or just like not just have it be, kind of like you're saying, a wall of noise for 8 hours or
Oh, yeah.
Right.
9
But-
tracks. Yeah.
To be clear, though, we really didn't discuss anything. We just sat down, hooked
Yeah.
up our gear, and
Did it.
we determined a key usually.
Yeah.
And then we just started playing and listening to each other. So it
Fantastic.
really was a jam, in that sense. Just let's play and listen to each other and make music.
We relied on each other's good taste.
Yeah. Yeah.
to-
So when
to
that
leave
didn't work,
space.
no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No.
Well, it could have been terrible, but it turned out pretty good. basically, Bob, we started getting these tracks together and said, let's release an album. And I go, okay. And we whittled it down. And at that point, I like to go to poetry books for titles.
Sure.
And I was just looking through, it was actually a translation of Dante's Inferno.
Oh.
And I was just looking for phrases that felt like the music or that I liked. And then I'd go through and look at all the phrases I came up with and said, oh, this goes with this and this goes with that, Right. So, and then when it came to the title of the album, that was one of the tracks. And I just thought it, what we were doing had a very luminous quality to it. And so we chose that one for the title of the album. No.
And I said, okay.
You said, okay.
It worked out.
We have a lot of things where somebody comes up with an idea and the other one says, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's a great collaboration though, right? That, like you can kind of, that you're calling on each other for different parts. And the fact that you just sat and played music with each other for so many hours, you just, like you said, Bob, we were kind of joking, but you tasted each other's trust and opinions, and that kind of cultivated the album.
Exactly. It's a lot of respect, a lot of trust, and the music, when it's all said and done, you listen to it, I think you'll find it very poetic. It is, I just love Glenn's playing. It's so lyrical, it's beautiful melodies, and to me, that's poetry in musical form, And so I thought the names and the whole aesthetic of what Glenn put together for it was perfect.
Well, let's talk about a few of the specific tracks. I was going to ask a bunch of questions about like post-production and different recording processes, but this is really, the best parts of a jam. And then obviously, I'm sure, Bob, you worked some of your, studio magic and engineering magic to kind of, sweeten things up sonically or, level things off. But pretty much what we hear is what we got or what we get, right? So let's talk a little bit about what we got, right? Which is when we talk about the first track here, When Fortune Laid the Trojans Low. I notice it begins with a clarinet kind of loop, which is not unique to the album and not unique to a lot of the things that you do, Glenn, where you create these like really great sort of simple melodies that are suggestive of other structures or figures, and they kind of evolve and loop. So that's how it sort of begins. And one of the things, I didn't really listen to it for like melodies or form or structure. I listened to it more from the perspective of like texture. And one of the things I noticed, Glenn, you were doing on that track, there were these sort of crescendos or crescendi, and sort of longer held notes, and then there was the shorter like sort of punctuations. Was that something maybe at that part? I don't know when it was in 2024. It might have been a while ago on a Saturday afternoon, but was that something, or is that something typically you play with, like saying like, can I have longer sustained tones, kind of opposite of more punctuated or staccato figures?
Oh yeah, it's actually that's a technique that I've developed, on doing stuff by myself. It was just a sound I like where I play a long note and then I switch notes really fast, so it comes out as a short note, but it just said duh, like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so, and when you line them up or put them all together, you sort of get these little bubbly sounds. I always liked that texture, so it was just one I brought in. It was something I'd been using, or that idea had used.
Yeah,
a lot,
and that's really nice because it kind of creates this sort of foundation, and then these little things that are sort of popping out.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same respect, Bob, I'm calling it like a glass type sound, but there's these other sort of, kind of like little crystal. It almost sounds like a ping on a glass, that are also sort of popping out of what I believe to be the synth texture. Which one of the things, by the way, that was really exciting is I was like, wait, is this clarinet? Is this Glenn or Bob right now? I don't know. I don't know. But can you talk a little bit about that? The figures I'm talking about, these little kind of like glass kind of skittering sounds.
There's a couple of different techniques that I was using there. Mm-hmm. One is on the Rhodes. So I have a recent edition of a Rhodes from Rhodes Music in England.
Sure.
And one of the features of this piano is it has a stereo Veripan modulation source. So the classic Rhodes sound would be, I'll just put a little LFO on it and the sound kind of just floats back and forth like this. Well, this one can go into audio range. And and you can change the waveform to a square, sawtooth, sine wave, whatever you want. And so some of the sounds you hear are me playing a chord on the piano, but I've turning the Veripan up into audio range, which creates this buzzing sound. Yeah. And then I'll change the tempo so it starts to slow down. So you start to hear the pulses. That's one technique. Yeah. And of course, the Rhodes piano just has beautiful bell tones, you know, when it starts shimmering. And the others, I am using the Osmos, and on the Osmos, which is an expressive keyboard where each key can go in to many different depths and left and right. There are some percussive sounds on that. So I was using that to create percussive sounds that were speeding up and slowing down. And again, because those were played into the Soma Laboratories drifting memory machine, the Cosmos, that would take those sounds, it would sample them and begin to play them back in the left or right channel in an additional percussive way. So it was chopping it up. So you get sort of this layered chopping, layers of speeding up and slowing down of modulation on what are, I guess, very traditional sounds, but they don't sound traditional anymore because they're being, modulated in that way.
But we're still sort of getting, kind of like Glenn was mentioning, we're getting these longer tones, of like the Rhodes, where it's this longer kind of odd harmonic type sound, and then these little punctuations, and that's really nice. And what's really kind of amazing about that is this was sort of you and Glenn negotiating this sort of live. You were hearing, Glenn was doing something, you were doing something, and you're kind of making these changes on the fly. So as you did these jam sessions, you said you did 4 of them. Were you, before you did the second one, did you go back and listen to the first one, or did you only have your memory of actually just participating in it?
No, I would do mixes in between and share it out and go, hey, here's what we did. And, so at the end, we really did sort of, we were able to listen to all of it, but at some point it became fairly obvious where the edits should be, where the best moments were, and we carved those out.
Yeah, and I think we just got better. It's not like we sat and listened to them and said, "Oh, that was good. Let's play like that" or anything. It was more like, we just got better at sort of understanding what the other person was doing and how to make it work better together. I don't know if any of the tracks are from the first session, but I think we definitely got better as we went along at figuring out how to do what we were doing.
Right.
I could actually answer that question, but I'd have to go look at the file system. So I don't know if we want to do that right now.
Well, there won't be an audit at the end of this episode, so we don't have to.
But there is at least one track from the very first session.
From the first one. So,
in fact, there are tracks from all the sessions. So every session made it on the album, and
great.
But it was good to listen back and sort of assess what was happening.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, this has been fantastic talking to you. Been a big fan of your music, both separately and together, and it's great. We can now check out the new album. Before I let you go, please tell us a little bit more about where, first of all, we can get the album, when we can get it, and then, of course, where we can find out more about you and your music together and individually.
Well, certainly on Bandcamp, DicksonFamiliar.bandcamp.com for All the Light of Our Sphere. It will launch May 30th, and it'll be on all of the streaming services. And Glenn, you have a Bandcamp page.
Yeah, I have my own Bandcamp page. I released one album before this that was, using the loops, the delay and everything. Whiter Than the Sky, you'll find it on Bandcamp under Glenn Dickson, Dickson. And so that's my first foray in releasing an album using all the delays and electronics. So.
Yep.
And I have a website, glendicksonmusic.com.
Yep. And you can find my music at bobfamiliar.bandcamp.com. I'm on all the streaming sites. And in addition to that, I also produce a podcast, which is called Ambient Arcana. And that's where I work with another gentleman by the name of James Bilbro. And he does all the research on selecting the short stories, or sometimes authors will contact us. And we have those stories narrated, and then I compose ambient music that is the bed underneath of the narration. And so that's called Ambient Arcana.
Thanks to Bob and Glenn for sharing their time and music with us. If you enjoyed this episode, check out other episodes in the series. And as always, like, subscribe, or leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.